AITA for refusing to babysit my boyfriend's niece during my vacation. I came to his place and he decided that I would be his personal babysitter while he went to play football with his friends. My name is Rachel, I'm 29 years old, and I've been dating my boyfriend, Jason, who's 31, for just under 2 years now. He's generally a great guy, smart, funny, dependable, and we've managed to keep things going even though he's been away for a few months on a long-term work trip. He's working on a project in another city about 5 hours from where I live, and while I miss him, I understood it was a good career opportunity. We planned for me to come visit him for a week and a half since I had some time off work. I was really looking forward to it, not just because I miss him, but because we had been talking about doing some specific things together while I was in town. There's this historical city tour I've always wanted to go on, and we had a conversation about it months ago where he told me, sure, when you come visit, we'll do it on my day off, make a whole thing out of it. I was holding on to that idea like it was the golden carrot. It was our one chance to reconnect in person and actually spend quality time, just the two of us. I arrived this past Saturday. The flight wasn't awful, but I was tired and excited to see him. When I got to his place, he looked awful, sick, pale, clearly not doing great. He said he'd caught a bug at work. I didn't mind at all. I told him to go lie down, and I spent Saturday cleaning his apartment, which was honestly a bit of a mess, picking up groceries, organizing some of the clutter in the kitchen and living room, and basically doing the things you do when you want to take care of someone you love. I didn't expect to go out or do anything big that day because I understood he needed rest. Sunday rolled around and I figured it would be another quiet day inside, but to my surprise, he suddenly announced he felt a lot better and wanted to go play football with some coworkers and local friends. I was kind of caught off guard. He had been curled up under a blanket the day before like he was dying, and now he's got cleats in his hand and is heading out the door like he's at 100%. But again, I didn't push back. I watched him play for the first hour, smiled when he waved over at me, and then went for a walk around the city and treated myself to a drop-in pedicure. I wasn't going to spend another entire day just sitting around waiting for him, and he didn't seem to mind. Fast forward to Monday morning. I was still getting ready for the day when he texted me from work, and that's when things took a sharp turn. His message read, "My niece is coming to stay Saturday and Sunday. I'm bringing her to football and you have to watch her, so no walking the city for you." Just like that. No context, no discussion, just a flat announcement like I was the hired help. I just stood there, rereading the message over and over again. At first, I thought it had to be a joke. But then I realized he was being completely serious. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Let me be very clear, I am on vacation. I took time off from my job, paid for a flight, and spent time planning this trip. At no point was I told that I would be expected to babysit anyone, let alone for an entire weekend. Not only that, but the niece, whom I've never met, is apparently young enough that she needs a guardian, but he doesn't even know how old she is. He literally just said he was told she needs watching, and assumed that I'd be totally fine taking care of her while he plays football again for half the day. Not to mention, this is the only weekend we have together where he's not working, and it was the only chance we had to do that city tour we had talked about for months. When I reminded him about it, he said we could just go, after work on Friday. As if the whole point wasn't to have an entire day to spend together exploring, not rushing through it in the late afternoon when everything is half closed and he's already half distracted thinking about work the next day. I was stunned. I told him this wasn't what I agreed to, and that I felt completely blindsided. He just kept saying that since I'm staying for free, I could spare a day to babysit while he goes out and plays. This is where I really started to lose it. First of all, yes, I am staying at his place, but let's not pretend he's doing me a huge favor here. His housing is paid for by his company. He's not paying a dime for this apartment. He's not covering my meals or activities or anything. And even if he were, is this really how you treat your partner? Like they owe you unpaid labor in exchange for being allowed to exist in your space? I'm not some freeloader crashing his place for fun. I'm his girlfriend. We're in a relationship. I came here to spend time with him, not to become the default babysitter while he disappears for hours at a time. And what really pushed me over the edge was how casually he sprung it on me. No heads up, no conversation, just a directive, you have to watch her. Like I'm his employee or something. Not to mention, the way he phrased it made it sound like I was being punished for wanting to go walk the city, like I had to be grounded. He said if I refused to watch her, it meant he would have to cancel his football game. And honestly, I kind of think he should. He's the one who agreed to take his niece that weekend. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't asked. And now I'm expected to drop everything I wanted to do so he can run off and have fun while I'm stuck at a park babysitting a child I've never met. I don't even know how to feel anymore. I'm upset, I feel disrespected, and I'm starting to question why he even wanted me to visit in the first place. Was it really to spend time together? Or did he just see an opportunity to have someone help out while he carries on with his usual routines? So, Reddit, am I the asshole for being furious about this? For refusing to babysit and telling him that if he's going to prioritize football over our plans, then he needs to deal with the consequences? He made a commitment to me when I planned this trip, and now he's acting like I'm the one being unreasonable for not wanting to be treated like a nanny. Update 1. Hi again, Reddit. First off, thank you for all the responses. Seriously. Reading through them made me feel way less crazy, and the validation from total strangers who didn't owe me anything meant more than I expected. A few people asked what ended up happening that weekend, and, well, buckle up. The sheer audacity of what unfolded still makes my jaw clench when I think about it. After that explosive text exchange where Jason told me I had to watch his niece because he had already made football plans, I'd made it crystal clear that I wasn't okay with it. I told him I wasn't comfortable babysitting, that this was my vacation, and that I felt disrespected by how he dumped it on me with no warning or conversation. He read my messages and didn't respond for the rest of that night. I went to bed fuming, unsure whether I'd wake up to an apology or just more avoidance. Spoiler alert, it was the latter. Saturday morning came and I was still sitting in his apartment, debating whether I should cut my trip short entirely or try to salvage the last few days in some meaningful way. I hadn't heard anything from him that morning, no message, no apology, not even a heads up about his plans. Then there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, it was his sister standing there, smiling like we were old friends. She had her daughter with her, a little girl, probably around 7 years old, dressed in a soccer hoodie and holding a little pink backpack. Without skipping a beat, his sister chirped, "Thanks again, Rachel. Jason said you were happy to help." And just like that, she handed off her daughter and turned to leave. I was so stunned that I just stood there, mouth slightly open, brain scrambling to process the fact that I was being handed a child I'd never met, without my consent, with zero explanation. The little girl looked up at me, totally comfortable, like this was something she'd done before. She walked into the apartment like she lived there, dropped her bag on the floor, and asked if we had snacks. Jason wasn't even home. He had already left for his football game. I felt a wave of disbelief and rage hit me all at once. He knew I said no. He heard me. And yet he deliberately orchestrated this handoff, told his sister I agreed, and slipped out before I could object. It was calculated. And cowardly. I texted him right away, my hands actually shaking as I typed. I told him this crossed a major boundary. That I had said no and he knew it. That this was manipulative and disrespectful on a level I could barely comprehend. He didn't respond for over an hour. When he finally did, the only thing he wrote back was, "It's only a few hours. Just chill." That was the last straw. I calmly helped the little girl gather her things, walked her downstairs, and called his sister. I told her Jason had not actually cleared any of this with me, and that I was not comfortable being put in this situation without warning. She sounded surprised, then embarrassed, then frustrated, not at me, but clearly at her brother. She came and picked up her daughter within 15 minutes. I didn't even wait for Jason to come home. I packed my things, wrote him a note that said everything I didn't have the energy to repeat, that I wasn't a stand-in babysitter, that being in a relationship doesn't mean becoming someone's unpaid support staff, and that I wasn't going to let him twist love into obligation. I told him I came there to spend time with him, not to be taken advantage of. I also mentioned that the way he tried to gaslight me into thinking this was normal, or expected, was absolutely not okay. I left the note on the kitchen counter, called a rideshare, and booked myself into a boutique hotel downtown. That night, I walked to the tour we were supposed to do together. It was colder than I expected, so I bought a scarf from a little vendor on the corner and a hot drink from a food truck near the entrance. The tour was beautiful. Lantern-lit streets, quiet stories of the city's history, and for once, I wasn't listening to anyone talk over me, dismiss my interests, or shift the plans to suit themselves. I took pictures. I talked to strangers. I didn't rush through it or check my phone for messages from someone who clearly didn't respect my time. I made a full day of it. I visited shops, had a long dinner alone, bought myself dessert without asking anyone if they were in the mood for sweets. I walked through cobblestone alleys lit by soft golden lights and realized how much I missed making decisions that were just for me. I felt like I could breathe again. And it was honestly the most peaceful, freeing moment I'd had in a long time. Update 2. A few days after I'd moved into the hotel and started trying to salvage what remained of my vacation, I got a phone call that I wasn't expecting. It was Jason's sister, the same one who had dropped off her daughter like I was the neighborhood sitter and then vanished without another word. When I saw her name pop up on my screen, my stomach turned. I didn't know what she was going to say. A part of me braced for guilt-tripping or a passive-aggressive scolding about how I abandoned a child or left her in a tough spot. I wasn't in the mood for it, but I answered anyway. To my surprise, her tone wasn't accusatory or even particularly angry. She sounded confused. She started off cautiously, saying she just wanted to check in on everything because Jason had told her I offered to watch Lily for the weekend. She said she wouldn't have dropped her daughter off like that if she thought I wasn't on board, and that she didn't want to impose. That was the word she used. Impose. I felt this flash of something between bitterness and relief that she at least understood that concept, because her brother clearly didn't. I told her everything. Calmly, honestly, and without sugarcoating it. I told her how I had received a last-minute text telling me I would be babysitting, how I never agreed to it, and how Jason had spun an entire narrative around my supposed willingness. I told her how I'd been looking forward to this trip for months and how he had not only neglected to prioritize our time together, but actually abandoned me with a child and disappeared to play football like it was no big deal. I told her I had said no. Clearly. Repeatedly. And how he went behind my back anyway, orchestrating a drop-off he knew I hadn't consented to. There was a long pause on her end of the line. I expected a defense, an excuse, something. But instead, I heard her sigh, the kind of sigh that carries more weight than words. She said, quietly but firmly, that it actually made a lot of sense. She said she had started noticing that Jason had been doing this kind of thing more and more lately, offering up other people's time like it was his to give. He had done it to her husband once, telling someone he'd help with a weekend project and then pulling out last minute, leaving her husband to clean up the mess. She said he did something similar to one of his co-workers, promising to help them move and then ghosting them, later claiming it was a misunderstanding. She even told me their mom had called him out recently, saying he always expected people to accommodate his schedule, his plans, his comfort. That Jason had a habit of acting like the people around him existed to fit into the gaps of his life, not the other way around. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of trying to defend someone who clearly didn't consider how his actions impacted others. That phone call hit me harder than I expected. For days, I had been fixated on that one awful weekend, on the betrayal of being left with a child without warning, on the disappointment of not getting to spend time with my partner, on the humiliation of having to explain to a stranger that I wasn't the volunteer babysitter she'd been led to believe I was. But now, all of that started to feel like a symptom, not the disease. It wasn't just about the niece. It wasn't even about football, or the city tour, or the lack of apology. It was about the way Jason sees people. Like tools. Like placeholders. Like pieces on a board he could shift around when convenient. And I started replaying moments in our relationship I had filed away in the mental drawer labeled, "Not a big deal." Like the time he volunteered me to bake cupcakes for his office party without asking me. Or when he invited 2 of his friends to crash on my couch during a weekend I had set aside for us to have alone time. Or when he told his mom I would help her organize the attic during a visit, even though I had told him ahead of time that I planned to work remotely that day. Every time I'd felt unsettled or used, I told myself it was a fluke. That he was just distracted, or busy, or trying to help, and had made an assumption. I gave him the benefit of the doubt over and over again. I'd laughed it off, brushed it aside, tried to be easygoing. Because that's what we're told to be, right? Understanding. Flexible. Supportive. But now, it felt less like flexibility and more like enabling. Because it wasn't a one-off incident. It was a pattern. And it had been there for a while. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Jason didn't see relationships as partnerships. He saw them as systems of utility, ways to streamline his life, reduce friction, and maximize his comfort. Other people's time, energy, and emotional bandwidth were simply things he could allocate like budget items. He didn't ask. He informed. He didn't apologize. He justified. And the moment you pushed back or asserted yourself, he acted like you were being unreasonable, dramatic, or selfish. That phone call with his sister cracked something open in me. I started reevaluating every time I had made excuses for him. Every time I'd convinced myself it wasn't worth a fight. Every time I told myself he'd just had a long day, or that he didn't mean it that way, or that I was being too sensitive. And I saw all those tiny moments for what they really were, red flags I had chosen to paint white. Jason never shouted. He never cursed. He never hit or cheated. But what he did do was quietly manipulate the people around him into serving his needs while making it seem like a favor. He used goodwill like currency and expected it to replenish itself without ever investing anything in return. And I had been so focused on making things work, on being a good girlfriend, that I didn't realize how one-sided it had all become. I didn't call him after the phone call. I didn't text. I didn't reach out. I extended my stay at the hotel for 2 more nights, then booked an earlier flight home. I spent the last few days of the trip doing the things I had wanted to do from the beginning: solo museum visits, walks by the river, sitting in cafes with my book and not checking the time. I didn't feel sad, not in the way I expected. I felt clear. Light. Unburdened. When I got home, I didn't hear from him right away. I think he expected I'd cool off and come crawling back with some half apology and a willingness to compromise. But I was done compromising my sanity for someone who saw me as a stand-in, a convenience, a resource. I haven't decided what I'll say when he inevitably reaches out, but I do know this: I will never again let someone treat my time and energy like they're theirs to give away. I had always brushed them off as stress, or miscommunication, or him being a little selfish sometimes. Update 3. When I decided to end the trip 2 days early, it wasn't a spontaneous decision. It had been simmering quietly beneath the surface for days, growing louder each time I opened my phone and saw no apology, no effort, no recognition from Jason that anything he'd done was remotely wrong. After that phone call with his sister, the one where she unknowingly confirmed every suspicion I had about his pattern of behavior, I knew there was no salvaging this. I had spent too much of the trip playing mental gymnastics, trying to excuse his choices, trying to frame everything in the best possible light. But it wasn't a matter of interpretation anymore. It was a matter of respect. And I was tired of waiting for him to offer any. So I packed quietly, not with bitterness or anger, but with a sort of exhausted clarity. I didn't rush, I didn't fume. I folded my clothes with the calm of someone finally done holding on. I booked the earliest flight home that made sense and left a short note at the hotel front desk in case he came looking, not for closure, but so there would be no ambiguity. No chance for him to twist the narrative into me being impulsive or irrational. I wanted my departure to be deliberate and unmistakable. I didn't tell him until I was already at the airport. Not out of spite, but because I knew he would try to talk me out of it if I told him earlier. And I didn't want to give him that chance. The moment I texted him that I had flown home early, my phone lit up almost immediately. He called me 5 times in a row. I watched the screen light up, buzz, dim, and start again. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear him trying to spin this in real time. I already knew how it would go: denial, defensiveness, the guilt-laced tone he always used when trying to paint himself as the misunderstood one. Then the text started. First, a seemingly innocent, "Can we talk?" followed by, "You're overreacting." That one made me roll my eyes. As if calmly leaving after being ambushed into childcare duties was an extreme reaction. He followed that with, "I can't believe you'd leave like this." And then finally, the one that ended it all, "You're being dramatic. If you loved me, you'd want to help out with my family." That was the moment I blocked his number. Not out of rage, but because that message told me everything I needed to know. In his eyes, love meant being available. Love meant obedience. Love meant silence. Love meant giving up your time and your plans and your peace to make his life easier. Love, to him, was something transactional. It had nothing to do with mutual care, or agency, or the messy, beautiful balance of two people trying to support one another without losing themselves. Love, for Jason, meant being used without question. No. Love isn't about being used. Blocking him didn't feel like slamming a door. It felt like unhooking a weight. Like releasing myself from a contract I never signed but kept getting billed for. There was no closure call, no dramatic confrontation, no final tears. Just silence. And in that silence, something started to shift. Since getting back, I've felt more like myself than I have in months. It's subtle, the way you start to feel the outlines of who you are again when no one is trying to bend them into shapes that better serve them. I reconnected with friends I didn't realize I'd been drifting from. People I used to laugh with easily, text on weekends, make spontaneous plans with. During the relationship, I hadn't been told to cut anyone off, nothing that blatant, but I had slowly started to withdraw. To prioritize his moods, his schedule, his preferences. Without realizing it, I had shrunk my world to accommodate him. And now, little by little, I'm expanding it again. I signed up for a weekend retreat at a state park I'd always wanted to visit. A mix of hiking, journaling, and disconnecting from devices, the kind of trip Jason would have complained about because it didn't involve sports or nightlife or watching something loud on a screen. I went alone, without needing to explain or justify it. I breathed fresh air. I woke up without a to-do list that revolved around someone else's wants. And it was enough. More than enough. I even booked another trip. Short, sweet, and entirely on my terms. A coastal town a few hours away, small art galleries, quiet bookstores, and an inn that serves homemade cinnamon rolls every morning. I'm going in 2 weeks. Just me. I don't have to check with anyone. I don't have to ask if it fits into their schedule. I don't have to feel guilty for wanting something that's mine. Jason was never a monster. That's what makes this harder to explain to people who only saw us from the outside. He didn't yell. He didn't cheat. He didn't raise red flags that were visible from space. But he chipped away at me, not through cruelty, but through entitlement. Through assumptions. Through the quiet belief that my time, my energy, my plans existed to orbit his. And when I stepped out of that orbit, even for a second, he called it drama. He called it abandonment. He called it unloving. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt in the way I expected to be. I'm not going to sit here and say he ruined me, or that I wish I'd never met him. What I do wish is that I had listened to myself sooner. That I had trusted those early flickers of discomfort instead of snuffing them out with excuses. That I had understood that boundaries aren't ultimatums, they're declarations of self-worth. So thank you again, Reddit. For the validation. For the tough love. For being the mirror I needed to see things clearly. I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm not wasting time trying to rewrite the past or salvage something that was always conditional. I'm just finally choosing myself.